When you picture the Persian Gulf, your mind likely conjures images of vast deserts, maybe intricate Islamic architecture. It's a region that's, well, almost synonymous with Islam.
Right, that's the common image.
But beneath that familiar surface, there's actually a vibrant, often surprising Christian presence.
Yeah, it's not a widely known story, is it?
Not at all. And that's precisely what we're going to explore in this deep dive.
Absolutely. The tapestry of faith in this part of the world is, well, far richer and more complex than many people realize.
So where did we get our information for this?
Well, for this discussion, we've drawn from research and, crucially, firsthand accounts, conversations with Christian leaders and individuals currently living in the Gulf, and also those who have returned home.
That personal insight must be invaluable.
It really is. It's worth noting that publicly available research and official statistics are somewhat limited. There are sensitivities involved, security concerns sometimes. So these personal narratives, they really fill in the gaps.
Okay. And our focus today is specifically on the Christianity of the South Asian diaspora.
Exactly. Within the 5 main Persian Gulf countries. So Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and Oman.
And just to clarify, when we say South Asian, who are we talking about?
Good question. We mean people originating from Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Quite a diverse group.
It really is. And listeners should prepare for some truly fascinating revelations, I think, including the fact that Christianity has deep historical roots here.
Deep roots, stretching way back to the early centuries AD.
Which is amazing in itself. But then there was this long period where its presence was, well, minimal.
Almost absent, yeah. And then a relatively recent resurgence, really fueled by economic migration. It's quite a story.
A compelling narrative of faith adapting and, in many ways, flourishing. So where do we start, that historical footprint?
Let's begin there. Let's unpack that history a bit.
Okay. So tradition holds that even Bartholomew, one of Jesus' original apostles, actually preached in South Arabia. Is that right?
That's the tradition, yes. And remarkably, early Christianity did indeed flourish here. We're talking ancient history.
Like how ancient?
Well, Qatar was already a bishopric by 225 AD. Think about that.
Wow. 225 AD.
And by 356 AD, there were 3 churches documented in Yemen. So a real established presence very early on.
That's fascinating, connecting this early presence to the broader development of the early church.
Exactly. And get this, bishops from Arabia actually participated in the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD.
The Council of Nicaea, that's huge.
Truly pivotal event in shaping Christian doctrine.
Okay.
By the 4th century, Nestorian Christianity, which was an early branch, with its own distinct theological takes, had become the dominant form along the southern shores of the Persian Gulf.
But then things changed.
Yes. With the rise of Islam in the following centuries, these early Christian communities largely faded, pretty much disappeared over the course of about a millennium.
So we jump forward quite a bit to the 16th century. The Portuguese arrive in 1506. You might think, okay, maybe a Christian revival.
You might think that, but it seems their impact was largely negative.
How so?
Well, the sources talk about violence, a legacy of bitterness. Actions like the destruction in Khor-Fakkan, for instance, it left a bad taste.
So not exactly relationship building.
Not at all. It wasn't until much later, 1819, with the arrival of Captain Thomas Perronnette Thompson of Britain, that we see a more, well, let's say, constructive engagement.
Thompson. But what did he do differently?
Well, he actively built relationships. He even learned Arabic, which was quite something then. And he played a key role in establishing general peace treaties in the region.
So a totally different approach.
Just stark contrast, yeah.
Yeah.
The Portuguese fought conflict. Thompson focused on diplomacy and understanding, and this sort of aligns with the growth of missionary movements back in the West during the 19th century.
Right. People inspired by figures like William Carey. You had the English Baptist Missionary Society, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Mission.
All getting started around that.
And they began early efforts to, well, share their faith. Things like Henry Martin translating the New Testament into Arabic.
Bible teacher sent by John Wilson in the 1840s.
And that new Arabic Bible translation started in 1848.
Exactly. And this leads us to the really significant work of the Arabian Mission, organized in 1889.
Ah, yes, Samuel Weimer and others.
Crucial figures.
Yeah.
They established a sustained Christian presence, not just through, direct evangelism, but also, really importantly, through setting up schools and medical facilities.
Hospitals, schools. That must have generated some goodwill.
Absolutely. Considerable local goodwill. It's quite remarkable when you think that the first Protestant church services were held in Kuwait and Bahrain in the early 1900s.
So actual church buildings came later.
Much later, yeah. And the first resident Roman Catholic priest only arrived in Kuwait in 1948. So it was a slow build.
Which brings us to a key turning point, I think. All that earlier activity laid some groundwork, sure, but the big Christian presence we see today.
Overwhelmingly, yes. It's shaped by the much more recent phenomenon of large-scale economic migration into the Gulf.
And how have the local authorities reacted?
Generally with a degree of tolerance. The ruling authorities have often granted freedom of worship, at least to expatriate communities.
And even helped facilitate it.
In some cases, yes, donating land for the construction of church compounds, for example. It's quite striking, really. Every Friday, you have these large gatherings of Christians for worship, often happening right alongside Muslim prayers in nearby mosques.
Which leads us directly into the context of South Asian migration itself.
Exactly. The massive oil wealth in these Gulf states created huge labor shortages.
So they needed workers.
They needed workers, and they imported them, mostly on a temporary basis. These migrant laborers now make up the majority of the workforce in many of these countries.
And South Asians are the biggest group.
By far. They form the largest expatriate community overall. Indians are the most numerous, followed by people from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Nepal.
And these aren't typically immigrants looking to settle down permanently, right?
Generally not. These are often temporary workers filling essential roles, construction, private businesses, government jobs.
And it's important to remember the conditions, too. They usually lack political representation.
Often receive lower wages than maybe Western or Arab counterparts.
Working demanding hours sometimes.
Definitely. And even if a South Asian person wants to start a business, outside of specific free zones, they typically need a local Arab partner.
So that context is really vital for understanding the demographics. Do we have any numbers?
We do have some figures that really paint the picture. Take the UAE, for example. Estimated total population over 8 million. Nearly 12% identify as Christian.
12%. That's significant.
It is. And Kuwait has an even higher proportion, maybe over 15% Christian. Qatar is the highest, potentially around 18.5%.
Wow.
And Oman and Bahrain also have sizable Christian communities, somewhere around 10 to 11%. Across these 5 countries combined, we're talking maybe over 2.3 million Christians.
And looking closer at their origins, the South Asian numbers are huge within that.
Absolutely. In the UAE, people of Indian origin make up something like 23% of the total population.
Yeah.
Pakistani origin, nearly 16%.
Huge percentages.
Kuwait, over 18% Indian, over 6% Pakistani. These figures just underline how significant the South Asian presence is in shaping the current Christian landscape there.
Okay, so with this massive influx of South Asian workers, how did their Christian faith actually take root and develop in this new setting?
Well, the earliest documented South Asian Christian congregation we know of in the Gulf was the Ahmadi Christian congregation in Kuwait. This was mostly Malayali Christians working for the Kuwait Oil Company back then.
Malayali, so from Kerala in South India.
Primarily, yes. Then in 1953, the Kuwait Town Malayali Christian congregation was formally set up.
And it grew from there?
It did. As the oil industry really boomed in the 60s and 70s, you had wave after wave of migration. This led to lots of congregations forming, mostly in the cities where South Asian Christians tended to live and work.
And just to reiterate, South Asians, especially Indian Christians, make up the largest group of Christians in the Gulf today.
That's the crucial point, yes.
Okay.
They are the demographic majority among Christians there.
But it's not like one monolithic block, is it? These congregations must be quite diverse.
Oh, incredibly diverse. Our sources helpfully categorize them in, I think, 7 key ways. It shows the variety.
7 categories. Okay, let's walk through them. What's the first?
First, you have mother tongue congregations. These are really vital. They reach people in their native languages, help with discipleship, preserve cultural heritage.
And even teach the language to kids born in the Gulf?
Exactly. And you find all sorts of denominations represented: Anglicans, Church of South India, Martama Church, many Pentecostal groups, Brethren assemblies. The list goes on.
Okay, what's next?
Then you have English language congregations. These often tend to be more Western influenced, maybe more multinational, multicultural, often trans-denominational.
And are these separate from the mother tongue ones?
Sometimes yes, but interestingly, we're also seeing mother tongue congregations starting to offer English services specifically for their youth, for the second generation who might be more comfortable in English.
Makes sense. Third category.
Church compound-based congregations. This is a really interesting feature of the Gulf.
The compounds, tell us about those.
Well, in major cities, the governments have allocated these large designated plots of land compounds, like Eniyak in Kuwait, Holy Trinity in Dubai, the religious complex in Doha,
And lots of churches meet there.
a huge number. They accommodate congregations from many different languages and traditions all on one site. Eniyak alone, for instance, might see around 20,000 people attending from maybe 85 different congregations every single week.
Wow, 20,000 people, that's like a small town.
It's incredible. These compounds become these massive hubs for all kinds of church activities.
Okay, so if there are compound-based churches, I guess there are also.
Non-church compound-based congregations.
Yeah.
Exactly. These are often unregistered independent groups. They might meet more discreetly, maybe in private villas or hotel function rooms.
And that comes with risks.
It does. They operate with a certain level of risk, the possibility of being discovered and shut down by authorities.
Then there are the labor camps.
Right. Labor camp congregations. Getting transport into the city can be a real challenge for many blue-collar workers living in camps outside the main urban areas.
So they form their own groups.
Often, yes. They frequently establish their own small house churches, you could call them. Often mostly men, given the workforce demographics. And pastors and other Christian workers from city churches often go out to provide guidance and support.
That's important outreach. 2 more categories.
Yes. Number 6, liturgical congregations. These are the ones that follow a prescribed, often printed, liturgy in their worship services.
Like Anglicans or Maratama.
Exactly. While some services might be in English, they're often in their mother tongues. Sometimes they even use Romanized scripts, like writing Malayalam or Tamil, using English letters so the younger generations can follow along more easily. Certain traditions might also use icons, incense.
And the final category?
Non-liturgical congregations. Think Baptists, Pentecostals, various independent churches. Their worship style is typically more informal, spontaneous, maybe more contemporary music, extemporaneous prayer. A very different feel.
Though that landscape is incredibly varied, it really shows the adaptability of faith.
It really does. Resilience, too, in that specific context.
So with such a wide array of congregations, what does the leadership typically look like? Does it vary as much?
It varies considerably, often depending on the denomination. In the established denominations, say Anglican, Martoma, Church of South India, you usually find theologically trained pastors.
Appointed from back home.
Often, yes.
Huh.
Appointed from overseas, they come in on special clergy visas, usually for a limited term, maybe 3 or 4 years.
And they work with locals.
They collaborate with elected lay leaders, elders, committee members who serve on church boards.
Yeah.
They're usually established constitutions, policies, and some level of, open discussion and decision-making.
Okay, but then you have the independent congregations. It sounds like the leadership model there is often quite different.
Yes, very often. Many of these congregations are led by pastors who are bivocational, meaning they have another job or they're lay pastors, and they often have limited formal theological education.
How is their leadership viewed then?
Well, a common perspective among these leaders, according to the research, is that the perceived success of their ministry, growing numbers, active participation, kind of validates their calling.
So maybe less emphasis on getting formal training?
Sometimes, yes. Although it's noted that a small but growing number are pursuing theological education, often through distance learning programs from India or the West.
Any other observations about leadership in these independent groups?
One interesting point from the research is that leadership in these groups can sometimes lean towards a more autocratic style, perhaps less collaborative than in the established denominations.
What about the role of women? You mentioned they often make up the majority in attendance.
Yes, this is a really noteworthy area, despite women frequently being the majority in both membership and weekly attendance in many congregations.
They're not often in top leadership roles.
Seldom. You don't often find women in pastoral roles or major decision-making positions on church boards. Their contributions tend to be more traditionally focused.
Such as?
Involvement in things like kitchen duties for church events, supporting women's fellowships, children's Sunday school, youth ministry. Important roles, but within certain traditional boundaries.
Is there pushback against that?
Interestingly, the research suggests there's generally not significant friction or, vocalized dissent about this. Many women reportedly value their traditional family roles and see their church involvement as an extension of that.
It seems like sheer necessity must have played a big role in developing lay leadership overall.
Oh, absolutely. With the limited number of ordained clergy available, especially in the early days, and even now in some places, lay individuals just had to step up.
Learning on the job.
Learning on the job, developing their skills through practice. And more recently, say in the last few decades, there's been much more access to ministry leadership training.
Seminars, program.
Exactly. Often brought in from the West, but increasingly from South Asia itself, too. This has actually contributed to what some researchers see as a higher proportion of competent, experienced lay leaders within Gulf congregations compared to what you might even see back in their home countries.
That's interesting. So some have even gone into ministry full time.
Yes, some of these lay leaders have transitioned into full-time or bivocational ministry roles as a result.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit now to mission. How are these South Asian diaspora Christians engaging with, well, what's often called the Great Commission, that call to make disciples?
Right. The whole concept of diaspora missiology becomes really relevant here.
Diaspora missiology, what's that exactly?
It essentially refers to the Christian response to and engagement with the global movement of peoples. The diaspora phenomenon, which is so huge in the 21st century.
Okay. And how does that apply in the Gulf?
Well, within the Gulf context, we can look at it through three main lenses. Missions to the South Asian diaspora, missions through the South Asian diaspora, and missions by and beyond the South Asian diaspora.
All right, let's take the first one. Missions to the South Asian diaspora. Now, it might seem a bit counterintuitive, they've already moved, but you're saying they were still, in many ways, an unreached population.
That's what the research indicates, yes. Despite the huge numbers, estimates are somewhere between 6.5 and 7 million South Asians in these Gulf countries.
And most aren't Christian originally.
Exactly. The majority adhere to other faiths, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, and despite their concentration there hasn't really been a large-scale coordinated strategy specifically targeting them for Christian outreach.
But people are converting.
Yes, significant numbers are converting to Christianity. And interestingly, sometimes at rates higher than what's seen back in their home countries.
Why do you think that is?
Well, perhaps the experience of displacement, being away from traditional social structures, maybe thinking community.
Yeah.
It might make people more open to exploring new beliefs, new connections.
So how is this outreach happening if it's not some big coordinated campaign?
Several approaches seem effective. One is simply relational evangelism.
Just people sharing with friends, colleagues.
Exactly. South Asian society is generally highly relational. And when migrants feel lonely or displaced, authentic friendships can be incredibly powerful. Sharing personal faith experiences within those relationships happens naturally. It kind of echoes how the early church spread, doesn't it? Individuals moving, encountering the gospel in new places.
That makes sense. What else? Christian television.
Christian television plays a notable role, definitely. There are channels, broadcasting programs, maybe Western ones with subtitles in South Asian languages, but also a lot of content produced in South Asia specifically for that audience.
Reaching people in their homes.
Right, in the privacy of their homes. And this can be especially important for new believers who maybe haven't found or aren't yet comfortable joining a physical church community.
We also hear about visiting ministers having an impact.
Yes, there's been a noticeable increase in sort of itinerant pastors, evangelists, musicians from South Asia. They get invited for short periods.
What do they do? Crusades?
Sometimes larger evangelistic crusades, yes, but also smaller meetings in homes, leadership training sessions, plus just the distribution of gospel materials.
Like booklets, DVDs.
Yeah, booklets, Jesus film DVDs in mother tongues, book exhibitions run by groups like Operation Mobilization when their ships visit, Bible Society bookstores in some areas. All these things contribute.
And what about outreach in the labor camps? You mentioned those earlier.
That seems particularly fruitful. Given that functional illiteracy can be higher in those communities, interactive methods like oral Bible storytelling are apparently very effective.
Not just relying on written materials.
Right, and special events around Christmas and Easter tend to be really well received. Plus, you have regular visits from city-based congregations and ministries going into the camps for fellowship, Bible study, worship.
And for younger people.
Youth outreach seems effective too. Things like retreats, camps, Christian fellowship groups forming on university campuses where South Asians study.
So the key point here is...
The really crucial takeaway is that many South Asians who come from people groups considered unreached with the Christian message back in their home countries are actually encountering faith and making decisions to follow Christianity while living and working in the Gulf.
That's quite a remarkable phenomena.
It really is.
Okay, so that's missions to them. What about missions through the South Asian diaspora? Are these new Christians then reaching out to others around them in the Gulf?
Well, initially, among the first generation of South Asian Christians in the Gulf, their mission interests often seemed quite focused. mainly staying within their own language or cultural group.
Understandable, perhaps.
Yes, building their own community first. However, there's an encouraging trend emerging, especially among the second generation, those who've grown up there.
What are they doing?
Despite sometimes feeling caught between cultures, not fully belonging to their parents' homeland or perhaps even the Gulf region, they're increasingly showing a passion for intercultural outreach.
Reaching beyond their own group.
Exactly. Getting involved in evangelism training programs, participating in mission-focused events that aim broader, it's a positive development.
Okay, and the third lens, missions by and beyond the South Asian diaspora. How are they impacting things outside the Gulf?
This is actually a really impressive aspect. Gulf South Asian Christians and their churches have become quite significant financial supporters for ministries back in South Asia.
Sending money back home for mission work.
A lot of it, yes.
Right.
Providing crucial funding for things like evangelism, church planting, supporting orphanages, helping build church buildings. Their generosity is widely noted.
So they're becoming a funding base.
A major one for some ministries. You'll often find small prayer groups within Gulf churches specifically dedicated to supporting a particular ministry worker or project back home. And representatives from those South Asian ministries frequently visit the Gulf to maintain those relationships, share updates, and, well, encourage continued support.
It's a powerful flow of resources, just in the opposite direction than you might expect.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. Many South Asians who become Christians in the Gulf eventually return to their home countries.
And they take their faith with them.
They do. And they often start house churches or plant new congregations in their villages or towns back home.
So planting seeds back in their place of origin.
Absolutely. And we're also seeing another wave. South Asian Christians who first migrated to the Gulf, gained experience, maybe leadership skills, and then subsequently migrated again to places like Australia, Canada, the UK, the USA.
And they contribute there, too.
Yes, bringing their vision, their experience, their passion to diaspora congregations in those Western countries. They often play key roles in establishing or strengthening those communities.
This paints a really dynamic picture. Faith in motion, constantly adapting, reaching out. But it can't all be smooth sailing. There must be challenges.
Oh, definitely not smooth sailing all the time. Our sources consistently highlight several significant areas of concern, real difficulties.
How many are we talking about?
The research points to at least 10 major concerns that kept coming up.
10. Okay, what's number one?
One of the most pressing, it seems, is the shortage of theologically well-equipped leaders to serve as pastors and teachers.
We touched on that with the lay leadership.
Right. Many current leaders, especially in independent groups, have limited formal training. And the concern is that this can sometimes lead to congregations that, well, lack robust doctrinal teaching and guidance.
Spiritually impoverished, perhaps?
That's the term used, yes. It potentially leads to a more superficial understanding of faith. You have to ask, what are the long-term consequences of that lack of in-depth training for the spiritual health of these communities?
A serious question. What's another concern?
Related to that, perhaps, is the potential for a kind of watered-down gospel message, maybe what's called easy believism.
Meaning?
Meaning perhaps an emphasis on just making a decision, without the follow-through of solid instruction and deep discipleship needed for real spiritual growth and transformation.
Okay. And the evangelism itself?
The approaches used are sometimes seen as less than holistic, maybe focusing only on a spiritual decision without addressing the whole person or their context, which could limit the long-term impact.
What about practical barriers?
A big one is the relatively high rate of functional illiteracy among some segments of the South Asian population. They're estimated maybe 30 to 40%. That obviously poses a huge challenge for evangelism methods that rely heavily on reading and for in-depth discipleship using written materials.
And internal church issues?
Sadly, yes. It appears that church splits are a recurring problem, and often they happen for reasons that aren't really about core biblical doctrine.
More like personality clashes, regional loyalties.
Things like that, yeah. Which, of course, can foster division, mistrust within the wider Christian community. Not a good witness.
Doesn't sound like it.
And connected to that, the fiercely independent nature of some churches and their leaders. While independence can be good, here it sometimes leads to isolation.
Not working together.
A lack of meaningful collaboration with other Christian groups, which ultimately weakens their collective witness and their potential impact in the wider society.
Are there external factors causing problems too?
Yes. The issue of manipulation, sometimes financial, sometimes doctrinal, by some visiting ministers who come in from outside the region, this is highlighted as a serious concern.
How does that cause damage?
Well, it can tarnish the reputation of the gospel message itself, create instability and confusion within congregations, and exploit people's generosity or vulnerability.
Okay, what about reaching the next generation?
That's another key challenge. There's often a potential disconnect between the more traditional worship styles, the music, the format prevalent in many mother tongue congregations, and the preferences and cultural context of the second generation.
The kids who grew up there.
Exactly. They've grown up in a different world, often more comfortable in English, maybe more attuned to global youth culture. Traditional services might feel less relevant or engaging to them.
And the focus within churches?
Well, the tendency for many congregations to remain very monocultural and monolingual, focused on their specific group from back home,
Can lead to what?
it can inadvertently foster sort of ethnocentric attitudes,
Mhm.
maybe make it harder to build bridges with Christians from other South Asian backgrounds, let alone other nationalities, and it can potentially discourage cross-cultural outreach within the diverse melting pot of the Gulf itself.
That seems like a missed opportunity.
It does. And that leads to the final major concern highlighted. There appears to be, generally speaking, a lack of burden or strategic thinking about reaching out to the local Muslim populations,
Even within the restrictions.
even within the clear legal and social restrictions that exist. There are ways to build bridges, show respect, share faith appropriately, but it often seems like a significant missed opportunity for positive interaction and witness within the broader society they inhabit.
So, quite a list of challenges. Serious ones.
Very real challenges, absolutely. But it's crucial to balance this. Despite these difficulties, the overwhelming picture is still one of vibrancy and dynamism.
There's real faith there.
Oh, absolutely. A genuine spiritual passion is evident. High levels of participation in church life. People report that their experience of congregational life is generally meaningful, supportive, vital for them in that context.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what we've really uncovered is this, well, surprising and energetic expression of Christian faith, thriving against the odds, you could say, in a region mainly known for Islam.
Exactly. We've looked at its ancient roots, then the near disappearance, and then this modern resurgence driven by migration.
We've explored the huge impact of South Asian economic migration, the diverse ways these Christian communities organize themselves, the mother tongue groups, the compounds, the house churches.
The different leadership dynamics,
Yeah.
from the formally trained clergy to the vital lay leaders learning on the job.
Their really active engagement in global mission, both receiving outreach and becoming a source of mission support themselves.
And yes, acknowledging those significant hurdles and challenges they continue to navigate.
I think the key insight for me is that remarkable adaptability, that resilience of faith when it takes root in new, sometimes quite challenging environments.
Definitely. This region, with its unique mix of cultures, restrictions, opportunities, it's become an unexpected and frankly significant center of Christian life and activity.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it, looking forward, with stronger, maybe more collaborative leadership, a clearer kingdom-focused vision that looks beyond just their own groups.
Could this region evolve into something even more? Maybe a truly influential, globally connected but locally impactful missions force in the years ahead.
It's a provocative thought. It certainly underscores the huge implications of these diaspora movements for the whole landscape of global Christianity, which is constantly shifting.
It really does.
So we hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a lot to consider. We encourage you to keep reflecting on these themes. What does it really mean for faith to take root, to adapt, and to flourish, sometimes in the most unexpected of places?